but also just when that moment comes, just take that one more step to gently and continually remind your child that all of these figures are teaching us about something that is utterly true, and that all of these stories, real, historical, and otherwise, story is the best way we learn.
Angels we have heard on high, sweetly singing o'er the plains, and the mountains in reply, echoing their joyous strains.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're sitting down with the legendary, the one and the only Alexander John Shaia to talk about some Christmas-related items, because really what Christmas would be complete without hearing from Alexander. So, Alexander, welcome back to the podcast. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Glenn. I thought I'm sitting down with the legendary Glenn Siebert.
Oh, no. No. It's the opposite. It's definitely the opposite. So for our listeners, full transparency, we are recording this in September, and we're talking about Christmas because getting something on the calendar for both of us close to Christmas was proving next to impossible. So we just said, let's just do it when we can. And so here we are. But even so, Alexander, you've got your navy blue Advent shirt on.
I've got my navy blue Advent shirt on.
There you go. I've got Christmas lights around my desk all year long, but I got them in the back of me as well for those of us who are on video. So we're about as festive as we can get for September.
All
right. So Alexander, I brought you on the show because I wanna learn from you a little bit about the topic of Santa Claus and the origins of Santa. And last year, you might remember, you turned me on to this book, which I have right here, When Santa Was a Shaman. And it's a book that goes into all these different details about the histories, the origins, the stories, right, surrounding this figure of Santa Claus. And I should say, and I'll mention this in the intro that I'll record before the episode, but just in case people miss that, this episode is not for the young ears because there are some sensitive things that we'll be discussing regarding Santa. So if small people are around, it might be best to pause this until a little bit later. But Alexander, I wanted to begin by asking you if you could share with our listeners a little bit about how Santa Claus came to be, like the figure that we have today. You know, the old guy with the white beard who wears a red suit. He brings all the presents to the children. Because after reading that book, like I realized there are so many different paths to travel. There's like so many different topics, like the Green Man, Coca-Cola's thrown into the mix. You know, Saint Nick's, shamans. Untangle all this for us and help us understand how we got to this guy that we celebrate today.
in 3 minutes.
In 3 minutes or less.
Right.
The clock starts now.
All right. So, and just, help me with this if I get lost in the weeds.
Yeah.
So I would like people to think about two main rivers that came together.
Mm-hmm.
And one is the historical figure of Saint Nicholas, a bishop in Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
And the other is the figure of the Green Man in the northern climates of Europe. Now, how do these two fit together? Well, let's start with Europe, Northern Europe, because it may come as a surprise, but as Christians, we did not have the feast of Christmas until we went north of the Alps into the northern climates of Europe, and we were trying to describe what we understood and what we celebrated, and they couldn't understand those of us from the Mediterranean basin, because the Mediterranean basin was largely about the moon calendar, and Northern Europe was largely about the sun, the SUN calendar. And in a very deep winter climate, the winter solstice is a critical moment, because if the sun, SUN, does not come back, all agriculture is gone. There's no warmth, there's no growth. And in those days, the people in those northern climates of Europe did not have our belief that, oh, well, this is the day that the sun turns around and it starts to grow again.
Mm.
They felt that they had to do spiritual practice to bring the sun back.
Mm.
So it was very important for them to be able to do the practices in their minds to encourage the sun to come back. And part of what their practices were the practices of generosity.
Mm.
That generosity, literally generosity in greening. You can think of the color green, like the springtime, and generosity as having a connection here.
Mm.
All right. So when we go, well, I keep saying we, when Christians, these are ancient ancestors of ours,
Sure.
go north of the Alps, go up into Northern Europe, and we meet this incredibly important celebration they have of bringing the sun back to life.
Mm.
They needed from us a figure that represented generosity. And of course, we could give them the figure of Jesus, but we also gave them the figure of Saint Nicholas. Now, let's bring Saint Nicholas into the conversation. Saint Nicholas is a bishop on the coast of Turkey, 3rd, 4th century. And Nicholas was born to uber wealthy family. Like in our language, Nicholas would have been born to, Nicholas was the only son of billionaire parents.
Right.
Tragically, his parents died at a very early age and left him orphaned, but quite wealthy. As a young man, Nicholas becomes a priest and then suddenly is elected bishop of this whole Christian area of Turkey. And Nicholas has got a heart of generosity. He is sitting on this fortune, but when he died, about 40 years later, he died a pauper. He gave everything to the people who didn't have food, who didn't have shelter. And he was especially known for, he would do this anonymously until he was finally tricked and caught. But in those days, families who had daughters and the family didn't have the money for a dowry, they would have to sell their daughter into slavery because they couldn't provide a dowry for her. And Nicholas, upon hearing that a family was in that situation, would leave bags of gold outside the doorway so that their young daughter would have money for a dowry. And finally, one family caught him, otherwise he would not have been known who was leaving all this money at the doorways. That's where the tradition of leaving candies and shoes on the Feast of Nicholas comes from, or this money that he left for young girls. So Nicholas was a figure, really the first 1,000 years of Christendom. He's the great figure. Today, we might say that St. Francis is probably the most popular saint, but in the first 1,000 years, it was Nicholas. And it's because no one came to him with a request and left without help. So when we go, Christians go north of the Alps, and we see this festival that the Celts have at the darkest time of the year. And what they are believing is that at the darkest time of the year, the correct practice is generosity. And I think that's so interesting for us to think about, because oftentimes we think about generosity when times are good. But for the Celts, they believed that at the darkest moment of the year, that was the moment to be most generous. So we brought the story of Nicholas to a story that they had. And I would actually say we brought the historical figure of Nicholas to this story that they had of quote unquote the Green Man. Well, just kind of hold on, this is going to seem kind of wild. And I don't know if people have ever seen images of the Green Man, but usually it's like a male figure with like oak leaves all over his face, etc.
Yeah.
And the belief is that and this is especially when we need to make sure that young years are not around. The Green Man left Earth every year at the summer solstice and went home to the North Star. And on the night of the winter solstice, people would create bonfires of oak wood. Oak wood was considered the most sacred wood. And so they were giving of their best wood as an enticement and as an offering for the Green Man to come back. And the Green Man would come back by following the smoke and the fire and go into the fire and go back into the earth and bringing the spirit of greenness and the spirit of generosity back to the earth and back to the people. So can you begin to hear why, quote unquote, Santa Claus goes down the chimney?
Yeah.
As a kid, that always bothered me. I was like, he could come through the window, he could come through the door.
Right.
Why come down into the fireplace?
Right.
and it's connected to this ancient story about the Green Man who followed the smoke back into the bonfire and back into the earth to help us at our darkest moment know the spirit of generosity.
Yeah. I always wonder too, like, what if the family went to bed and the fire was lit? What happens to Santa? They get torched. Yeah.
I mean, we had a fireplace in the house that I grew up in as a kid, and I was like, I would not let my parents put a fire in the fireplace for days before. And
clean it out for the guy.
I was cleaning it out. I was like looking up the chimney. I'm like, is it big enough for him to get in?
Right.
Anyway, the whole thing.
Yeah. Wow.
But also, the Green Man had an animal that the Green Man was known for because this animal represented generosity. And can we imagine what animal that was?
Tell us.
The reindeer.
The reindeer. Shocker.
Right. Because for the people in those northern climates, one reindeer would give them food, clothing, cords. I mean, one reindeer kill could give them everything they needed to survive the winter.
Yeah.
So the reindeer was sort of the totem animal to the Green Man.
Yeah.
So when we met, again, we Christians met the Celtic world, we realized that we needed to tell a story from Jesus's life. And this is when the story of Jesus's birth became so important. Because up to this point, it was really much more the death resurrection that was the core story. But now we had this other great story of Jesus about a sacred life and about generosity. But we also wanted to really meet this story about the Green Man. And so as these great stories happen, the historical Saint Bishop Nicholas from Turkey and the great mythic story of the Green Man intermingled into this figure who would come every year at our darkest time in the Northern Hemisphere. And that's really important that this figure comes in the darkness. And we can think about that interior time of darkness as well as the outer winter when there's little light and no seeming growth, etc. To re-green our hearts, to bring us wonder and joy and the spirit of generosity. Because for the Celts, they knew that without wonder, joy, and generosity, there were so many people that were not going to live to the springtime. The old, the sick, the widowed, all of those people in their culture that needed the rest of the people's help. They depended on that generosity. They depended on that return of joy and wonder.
Mm.
So all of this got created for the Celtic peoples in the creation of the Christmas festival,
Mm.
but also joining St. Nicholas to quote unquote Santa Claus. Santa Nicholas is where the Santa Claus comes from.
Mm.
And up until just about 100 years ago, this figure of Santa Claus
Mm-hmm.
was usually either clothed in forest green
For the
or
Green Man.
dark navy,
Mm.
the midnight blue of winter,
Mm-hmm.
or the deep green of the returning Green Man. And then, as you've already introduced, Coca-Cola had this idea in the 1930s because in the United States, Coca-Cola could not advertise to could not advertise to children,
Mm-hmm.
could not advertise to families because there was this minuscule Coke that was in Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
And so someone in the advertising circle of Coca-Cola said, oh, let's dress Santa Claus in Coca-Cola red and white.
Yeah.
And it stuck. And it went around and it went around the world.
That's so weird to me that that's how every time you say that, it just blows my mind that that's how that image came to be.
And so obviously there was something in us that in the 1930s,
Yeah.
as we were getting, as times were very tense and the drumbeat of war was
Yeah.
upon us, there was something about the red that helped or attracted.
Yeah.
But it was Coca-Cola, and it is that moment where advertisements suddenly become international phenomena.
Yeah.
But if you go back and look at those beautiful
Hmm.
pictures of Father Christmas or Saint Nicholas from the 1800s and the early 1900s, you will usually see in sort of a velvet midnight blue
Hmm.
or a deep green,
Yeah.
occasionally in like a purple red.
Okay. Huh. So then, like, I'm thinking now, like, of my grandmother was born in, I want to say it was 1923, maybe. And so that means that when she was a kid, my grandma's not around anymore, so I can't ask her. But when she was a kid, that would mean that the image of Santa Claus that I had as a kid was obviously much different for her because that
Yeah.
red and white hadn't been introduced yet.
Now, red and white came in the early 1930s, really
Yeah.
the height of the
Interesting.
Depression, but
Yeah.
the 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 drumbeat of the World War on the horizon.
Yeah. All right. So then all this talk then about like the Green Man and Saint Nick, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost like the Christians were trying to build a bridge. Is that the right word with the Celtic people to kind of introduce, to kind of not throw away what the Celts were doing and just we're going to do what we do, but to almost find like a way to marry two things together to build a bridge between these two groups. Would that be an accurate way to say?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mm.
And there's always this sense of Jesus is a historical figure, but Christians usually found a follower of Jesus that seemed closer to how we lived,
Mm.
so that they could point and say, "Look, what he did. He's a human like you
Yeah.
and me,
Yeah.
and if he can do it, we can be inspired to do it too."
Yeah. Huh. Now, you said before about when Nicholas would leave the dowry and how that kind of morphed into the tradition of leaving candy and trinkets and the shoes and things like that. Did that then evolve into leaving the presents under the
Yes,
tree? So like we
yes,
can trace it back to those stories.
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And what I like to remember is that all of this is about teaching us about generosity,
Yeah.
about the joy and the wonder in being a generous people and in helping others.
Yeah.
And bringing that to a child, but bringing that to each other, and especially bringing that to people who have so little at
Yeah.
this time of the year.
Yeah. So that's a good segue into another question I have, because I was thinking about, you and I had talked about this when we were kind of brainstorming about this episode. But like what are some different things that parents can tell their kids about Santa? And we'll talk in a little while about when kids stop believing in Santa, things like that. But for now, like what can parents tell their kids before that happens? Because I have some friends, which is fine, don't tell their they chose not to tell their kids about Santa. So from right off the bat, Santa's not real. And they do that because they want their kids to know that their moms or dads or families, whatever, work really hard all year long, for the gifts that they buy. And they it creates more of a thankful heart, I guess, in the child, because they understand that mom and dad had to work and save in order to do all this stuff. And that's fine. But then you have other parents who tell their kids all about Santa, and they really go into all the things. That's like in our house, it's just all about Santa Claus, things like that, and the kids get really excited about it. But whatever parents decide to do is fine. But I'm curious about, like, what are some different ways that parents can introduce these topics into the conversation that we just had, regardless of if they tell their kids about that Santa's real or not? Because I think that some of the history just told us about the Green Man is so rich in meaning, and I'm wondering about how we can bring those into the stories that we tell our kids today. If you have any thought about that.
Well, I mean, the first thing is, um, I know, especially for people who have had any sort of a downturn during the year, or someone in the family has died,
Yeah.
or natural disaster, December and Christmas can be the worst moment of the year.
Yeah.
And I really want all of us to understand that part of the power of Christmas is teaching about how there can be generosity, there can be love, there can be care,
Mm,
even when we are in the coldest, most unforgiving moment of our life. And maybe it's an outer winter or an interwinter.
mm,
But this is the reason that Christianity created the feast of Christmas, to tell the historical story of Jesus' birth, but to tell it in the winter time,
mm,
because there is the possibility in those winter days that love, joy, wonder, generosity can be reborn.
yeah.
So I would, so in whatever way that parents tell the story, whether they choose to tell the story of Santa Claus or not, to know that they're not just telling about this mythic figure, but they're using this story to help their children understand about the power of generosity.
Mm,
And that as a child is receiving that generosity. But as a parent, I know that there's going to come the day when we're going to want to bring the child as an active participant in offering that generosity to others,
yeah.
being part of creating that generosity,
Mm,
creating that care.
mm,
So thinking of I've got a great nephew who was 7 and a great niece who was 6, and the sheer joy on their faces in December.
yeah.
But I'm already talking with their parents about how, the day is going to come, and maybe it's going to be another year or two when they're going to cross the bridge. But I really hope that we don't take them across the bridge just with, oh, Santa isn't real and your parents are the ones who have been doing this. True, but that we can help them understand that now they can take an active part
Yeah.
in spreading that generosity in a dark
Yeah.
season.
Yeah. That's really good because that's what I'm so I'm so nervous, I guess, so like scared about that day because Jordan is in school and so she's in first grade now. And I know that one day she's gonna come home and she's gonna say that some kid told her that Santa's not real. And then she's gonna look at me and say, "But he is real." Right, Daddy? And I told Dana, I was telling her the other night, I'm like, I'm that's gonna be the day, like, I pray that I was wrong about the rapture and that Jesus comes back and takes me. Right then and there. It's like, what? Just like, look, I just know the look she's gonna have on her face. And it's it's hard as a parent because like you said, like there's so much magic around the season and there's so much anticipation, there's so much, you know, mystery, there's so much fantasy, there's so much of all of those things that surround the time from really like right after Halloween for us, and it goes right up until even after Christmas, and just to know that all of that could change, because of what somebody tells her is uh is devastating to the heart of a parent, because it's just everything will change regarding that season. And so I think that it's important to think about, like you just talked about, some creative ways to talk to our kids as opposed to just saying, yeah, the kid is right, Santa's not real, and it kind of stinks, and but we're still gonna have fun anyway, versus bringing them into the even deeper mystery, and maybe having that deeper mystery take on a whole new meaning for the season of Christmas for the family.
Yeah. There's a story, there's a cultural story, and I know it doesn't, we can't recreate it in some way, but I think
Sure.
about this story a lot, and it comes from the indigenous peoples of New Mexico in the US,
Hmm.
amongst the Pueblo peoples. And in their sacred rituals, they have these figures called the Quetsinas. And each, they have a whole, I mean, like maybe 20 different Quetsinas, and each one represents a different virtue.
Hmm.
And then there comes a moment when the child is going to learn that this figure that appears at their rituals, half godlike and half human-like.
Hmm.
Um, one of the Katsinas visits the house and sits the child down and slowly takes off the mask
Hmm.
and begins to tell them the story about the virtue that they represent.
Hmm.
And that they have been wearing this not because the virtue was not real, but as a way to help them live that virtue in their life.
Yeah.
So that's sort of complex language, but what I would hope parents would not do is just say, "Oh, Santa Claus is not real," and mommy and daddy have been doing this all the time, which is all true. But
Yeah.
one more step,
Mm.
we've been doing this because we want to help you learn about generosity and about
Yeah.
joy.
Yeah.
And now we want you to be part of it with us.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I was reading, and I wish I could find it. I looked for it this morning, but there was a blog post I came across um, a few months ago, and the person was talking about their interaction. I think it was like a father was writing the blog post about the story of their child coming to the realization that Santa wasn't this real, figure. Um, and talked about how the husband and wife kind of sat the child down. I thought it was really interesting because one of the things that stuck out to me is that they said to the child, um, you know, right now you're feeling like, the story of Santa Claus, isn't real, that that it's not, that's the lie, is that Santa, isn't real, but actually the real secret is that Santa is real, and that it's the spirit of Santa, the spirit of Santa Claus that lives within, mommy and daddy. And that now that you are in on the secret, you get to be part of it because you get to do the same thing for other kids who are younger than you, whatever. You get to do the same thing for them that we've been doing for you. And so like you're almost like on Team Santa now, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And it kind of made the child, like, it didn't take everything away, but it kind of helped the child see that, like, just because Santa isn't who I thought he was, doesn't mean I have to give up Santa Claus. Because I think about Jordan, who's a lot like me, and I have trouble letting things go, and I really struggle with that. And so I think that for her, that's going to be the big struggle, is that all my life, whether it's been 6 years or 7 years or 8 years, whatever, this has been what Christmas is, and now I have to let it go, and it's something entirely different. But I think if we can help our child see that that different thing isn't necessarily a bad thing, as different as it might be, but actually a really exciting thing that we get to participate in as a family around the season of Christmas. I think that that can shine a whole new light on things.
And
Yeah.
I know for some, they might want to go one more step to remember that Saint Nicholas was being the generous person he was by the power of the Spirit,
Yeah. Yeah.
as a follower of Jesus.
Yeah.
And that is ultimately for all of us, especially in dark times. Um, it's the power of the Spirit that allows us to do a bit more than what our ego minds might want.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's funny because, like, thinking about Jordan, and I know her mind works a lot like mine does. So I know that the next
Mhm.
question she's gonna ask is, well, I've never seen Santa Claus, and now I'm finding out that Santa Claus isn't really doesn't come down my chimney at Christmas. I've also never seen Jesus, but yet you tell me that Jesus is real. And I know that's gonna be the next conversation, probably on the very tail end of the Santa Claus conversation. But I think, what you had said earlier about how this mystery, these traditions of Santa Claus, these stories are meant to teach us deep things about generosity, and that they are based upon historical figures like Saint Nicholas and things like that. The same is true of Jesus, and that Jesus is a historical figure. And we tell these stories about him that have been handed down through all these generations in order to teach us deeper truths, deeper mysteries about life, whether it's about love, or it's about forgiveness, or it's about having grace on people, or being generous with people. Like, these are all of the life principles that come out of the story of Jesus. So just like Santa Claus, all these things can come out of that story. So many things come out of the story of Jesus as well. So it's not that Jesus isn't real, isn't true, or anything like that, but there's a deeper mystery to it, just as there is with Santa.
And I would not want parents to get really uptight, but also just when that moment comes, just take that one more step to gently and continually remind your child that all of these figures are teaching us about something that is utterly true,
Yeah,
and that all of these stories, real, historical, and otherwise, story is the best way we learn.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know. I'm debating if I want to go this route, but I'm just gonna say it really quick because I told you the story the other day. I think it would be helpful for our listeners. But Jordan was asking me, in the midst of all of this, thinking about these topics, she was asking me about a Bible story. She's asking me about, Peter walking on the water. She said, I want you to tell me the story. And so I'm like, all right, so I go into my full story mode. I whip out, blow the dust off the story in my brain. I tell her the story. I think I did a great job. And she's like, so if I go outside right now, we're at the beach, and I could walk on the water. I'm like, wow, like, I don't know. I don't know if that's gonna work. So, well, if I walk off the dock, will I walk on the water? I'm like, I don't know. It's like, well, it says that in the Bible. It says that's the story, so it must be true. I was like, well, what if? And I said, what if the story, is meant to teach us like a deeper truth? And she's like, well, what do you mean? I was like, well, I said, Peter seems like impossible to walk on the water, right? She's like, yeah. I'm like, yeah. I said, but he got out of the boat. He was focusing on Jesus, and he was able to do this impossible thing by walking on top of the water. I said, but when he took his eyes off of Jesus, what happened? She's like, well, he began to sink. I'm like, exactly. I said, so maybe the deeper truth of the story is that we can do hard things. We can walk on top of impossible situations when we keep our eyes locked on Jesus, on love, on forgiveness, on generosity, whatever it might be. When we focus our attention on that, we're able to do the really hard things of life. And when we look away from that and we focus on other things, whether it's our fears, our anxieties, whatever, we begin to sink. And I could see like a little light bulb went off in her head. Like I was wondering if she was going to press even harder, but she didn't. She just kind of went off to something else. But it was almost like something like an aha. Almost like there was a sense of like freedom in there, because I almost felt like she felt like it's impossible to walk on water, Dad. Like I don't know if you've ever tried it, but I could tell like she was thinking like it's just not something that you can do. So I think there's almost like a sense of relief there to understand that maybe the story isn't this literal thing, but it actually has a deeper meaning to it.
Right. And she's right at that age point when she can begin to understand that a concrete story can be teaching us something more than just the literal
That's right.
concrete
That's
elements of the story.
that's right. That's
And
right.
that's just what we want to do with Santa Claus when that
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah. That's really good.
Because
Okay.
Santa is true,
Yes, exactly. Is true.
just not the outer costuming.
Yeah. And I think it's understanding too that like truth, you and I talk about this all the time, that truth doesn't necessarily mean historical reality, right? Like it's not like just because truth isn't necessarily historical. Truth is something that's deeper than that. I think that once we make that connection, we can understand that all of these stories have a depth of truth to them. So last question, in regards to all of this stuff, I'm interested, like how do you, Alexander John, bring this stuff into your celebration of Christmas? Because I know you're a big Christmas guy, and I know that you this is like one of your favorite times of the year. So I'm interested, like, how does the Green Man and all of those kind of traditions make their way into your celebration of the holiday, so that maybe some of our listeners can incorporate some of that into their own traditions?
Well, and I love the beauty and the wonder and the generosity of December.
Yeah.
But I also know in my own life and working so many years as a therapist, this can also be the worst month of the year.
Yep.
So I have practices where I where I want, my great phrase, I light candles in December
Mm.
to decorate the dark.
Yep.
I light candles not to say the light is going to drive out the dark, but the light is going to help me hold the dark.
Mm.
It's going to help me hold the bitter times and the hurt.
Mm.
And that there's another power that can take the wounds and make them a radiant joy.
Yep.
So December is this sweet, bitter month.
Mm.
Because I never, ever, ever want anything that I do to say to someone else, they're shut out from the joy, they're shut out from the wonder, that I'm not celebrating something that isn't accessible, that they're not included in.
Mm.
Um, oh, I've had difficult Decembers where I've watched the world go by with everybody seemingly happy and mine just breaking apart inside.
Yeah.
This celebration of the winter solstice for the Celts and Christmas for us was about there is a presence in the dark times
Yeah.
that can hold us.
Yeah.
And that's the most generosity of spirit ever.
Yeah.
So I try to do things in December that remind me of joy and remind me of wonder, even when I don't feel it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good, because I'm everybody knows, the listeners know, that my father passed away in March, and so this will be the first Christmas without him, and I'm just sensing that it's great to have Jordan because she brings all the excitement to every day, but there's going to be that very heavy sense that there's something really important that is missing in a sense, and so that idea of decorating the dark with the light, and that even things like generosity, even things like love, all these things are accessible in the midst of the darkest times, is a really important thing to remember for me. And as you were talking even about like the Green Man before, and I know this has like nothing to do with the actual tradition or origin of it, but I was thinking about, like you were saying, about how the Celts believed that the Green Man would be attracted to the burning of the wood, and that brought him back. And I just thought to myself, like, honestly, like my heart feels like it's a raging fire the last 6 months, and that's only going to increase as time goes on. And that as we approach that Christmas season, that burning of my heart is not something that drives the spirit away, but something that magnetizes and brings the spirit even closer. And so just to kind of let the fires burn, let the fires rage, and know that the spirit will draw close to that.
And we can live through this.
Yeah. Yeah.
25 years ago, my mother died a couple of days before Christmas, suddenly.
Mm.
And her funeral was on Christmas Eve. It was on the
Oof.
24th of December. And they brought the coffin into the church, and the church was all decorated for Christmas, and it was filled with red poinsettias.
Mm.
To this day, I cannot look at a red poinsettia. I burst into tears.
Mm.
And it's part of Christmas.
Yeah.
And I don't want the tears to ever stop,
Yeah.
because they bring me back to the gratitude.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. We feel like the world tells us that we need to push the tears away and move on with life. But you're right. That was always my approach, but I'm finding that the tears, it might be heavy in the moment, but at the end of the day, I feel like the tears bring me back to that sense of thankfulness. Yeah. It's so good. All right, my friend, we are just about out of time,
Even
but
even
yeah,
though it's September.
even though it's September. That's right.
Merry Christmas, Glenn.
Merry Christmas to you, my friend. Thank you. Real quick, is there any place, I know you're working on a lot of things these days. I know because I'm working on them with you, but is there anything, any general announcements you'd like to make to the masses, of anything you want to invite people to or to come check out?
Quadratus is becoming quadratus.org.
Yeah.
We're in a little bit of a quiet piece right now as we do a lot of work behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I hope people will put Quadratus in their Christmas prayer and know that all of you are in our Christmas prayer.
Right. Thank you. Well, I'll put your links in the show notes, and I'm sure that we'll do this again very soon, because that's what we do. Merry Christmas, my friend.
Merry Christmas.
Angels we have heard on high, sweetly singing o'er the plains, and the mountains in reply, echoing their joyous strains. Gloria in excelsis Deo. Gloria in excelsis Deo. Come to Bethlehem.